going on, everybody? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we're going to be doing a review of Chapter 2 of the autobiography of Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery. And the title of Chapter 2 is Boyhood Days. So after they received freedom, blacks in the South agreed on two things that they should do. The first was to change their names, and the second was to leave the plantation for a few days just to make sure that they were free. Some slaves or former slaves decided to keep their former slave master's name, but this was the first sign of freedom. The fact that they could actually choose to keep the name or choose to have a new name. That was our first sign of freedom. Booker says, quote, after they had remained away for a while, many of the older slaves especially returned to their old homes and made some kind of contract with their former owners, by which they remained on the estate. So some slaves actually went back to their slave masters and put a contract together so that they can keep working as slaves, kind of. Booker's stepfather, who was his mother's husband, did not belong to the same owner as Booker's mother. So his stepfather and his mother had different owners. His stepfather sent for them to come to West Virginia, and the children walked several hundred miles to get to West Virginia. None of them, that would be Booker or his family, had ever been far from the plantation. They were able to keep in touch with their former owners and other former slaves. They traveled to Malden, near Charleston in West Virginia. Booker's stepfather was working in the salt mines. Booker felt that the living conditions in West Virginia were worse than on the plantation. Booker writes, quote, no sanitary regulations. The filth about the cabin was often intolerable. End quote. Booker and his brother began working in the salt furnaces. The first thing that Booker learns is the number 18. This was the number assigned to his father for mining salt. Booker always had an intense longing to learn to read. He writes, quote, if I accomplished nothing else in life, I would in some way get enough education to enable me to read common books and newspapers, end quote. His mother was able to get him a Webster spelling book so that Booker could teach himself how to read. So she got him a little book that would spell words, like a little dictionary, I guess, or just spelling. The Negroes in the area pooled their resources to start a school. Booker speaks of what he calls, quote, the intense desire which the people of my race showed for an education. He continues, quote, it was a whole race trying to go to school, end quote. So right out of slavery, the key thing that our people were trying to do was get an education and build a school. One of Booker's greatest disappointments came when the school opened, and the school opened in Kanawha Valley. His stepfather would not allow him to go to school because he needed him to work. So that was one of his biggest disappointments, was the fact that he couldn't go to school and he had to work. While working, Booker was able to see kids coming and going to and from school. He writes, quote, I apply myself with greater earnestness than ever to the mastering of what was in the blue-black speller. I apply myself with greater earnestness than ever to mastering of what was in the blue-black speller. So him seeing the kids and being jealous of their position made him more determined to learn as much as he could from the spelling book that his mother gave him. Booker was able to get night lessons from the teacher. Then he went to day school later on. He had to change the clocks in the salt furnace in order to get to school without missing anything. So he advanced the clocks so he would be able to leave earlier than the actual time. Booker speaks of two difficulties he identified once he started day school. One was that he didn't have a hat like the other kids, and the second was that he didn't have a last name. His mother made him a hat which gave him a tremendous sense of pride throughout his life, and he gave himself the last name Washington, not knowing that his mother had named him Taliaferro, and that's where his middle name comes from. Booker T. Washington is Booker Taliaferro Washington. That was his original last name that he didn't know about. He thought about the idea of having a long ancestry with an inheritance, but he says, quote, I should have been inclined to yield to the temptation of depending upon my ancestry and my color to do that for which I should do myself. Years ago, I resolved that because I had no ancestry myself, I would leave a record of which my children would be proud and which might encourage them to still higher effort. So he thought about what he could do if he had a proper ancestry, but he also understood the benefits of not having an ancestry and having to create that. That was something that he took a lot of pride in, and he hoped that his children could look to his life and start some form of ancestry. Negro boys are expected to fail while white boy success is taken for granted. Booker says, quote, those who constantly direct attention to the Negro youth's moral weakness and compare his advancement with that of white youths do not consider the influence of the memories which cling about the old family homestead. So in this chapter, he talks a lot about families and how having a family or not having a family can affect an individual's development throughout their life. Booker continues, quote, the very fact that the white boy is conscious that if he fails in life, he will disgrace the whole family record, extending back through many generations, is of tremendous value in helping him to resist temptations. The fact that the individual has behind and surrounding him proud family history and connection serves as a stimulus to help him to overcome obstacles when striving for success, end quote. So that just further explains what I was saying previously. Booker has no knowledge of his grandmother. He didn't know where his cousins were located. So he really had no family outside of his mother and his brother, sister, the adopted brother, and his stepfather. Booker slowly went back to working instead of school. He had to go back to attending school at night. Booker felt that his teachers only knew a little bit more than he did. He writes, quote, there was never a time in my youth, no matter how dark and discouraging the days might be, when one resolve did not continually remain with me. And that was the determination to secure an education at any cost, end quote. Soon after moving to West Virginia, Booker's mother adopted an orphan boy. They named him James B. Washington, so that's his adopted brother. After working in the salt mine for some time, Booker began working in the coal mine. Booker saw the coal mine as a dirty job. He had to walk a mile in the darkness of the mine to get where the work was being done. He would sometimes get lost and be without a light. So I think he talked about a specific instance of being lost in a pitch black, dark, black mine with no light, trying to find your way out. So yeah, check that out. The coal mine was also dangerous. He could be blown up or crushed at any time, and this kept him in constant fear. Booker felt that young boys working in coal mines for long term would dwarf their physical and mental development. Booker would imagine the privileges of being white. He says, quote, I used to envy the white boy who had no obstacles placed in the way of his becoming a congressman, governor, bishop, or president by reason of the accident of his birth or race, end quote. Once he got older, Booker no longer envied whites. He writes, quote, I have learned that success is to be measured not so much by the position one has reached in life as by obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed. He continues, quote, with few exceptions, the Negro youth must work harder and must perform his task even better than a white youth in order to secure recognition, end quote. But this gives the black youth strength and confidence that he could not get without obstacles. And it ends with Booker T. Washington stating that he was proud to be a Negro. And that's the end of chapter 2. Next will be chapter 3. If you like what you heard, make sure you share this information. If you disagree with anything, list it in the comments. And if you'd like to make a donation, I forgot the foundation that he's got, but check on the previous video or the next video. I'll have it up there. Other than that, thank you everybody, and catch y'all in the next video. Peace. Assalamu alaikum.